koutou katoa, and welcome to everyone joining us for this webinar this evening. My name's Nina Hood and I'm the founder of the Education Hub. Just a couple of things before we get started this morning. This evening. Goodness me, it's obviously been a very long day. Vicky is currently in the middle of a power cut, and so she is able to join us. However, she's not going to have any video, but we're really keeping our fingers crossed that her sound is going to keep going, because obviously she is the person that facilitates all of our early childhood webinars. So she's here and is going to be participating, and we just keep our fingers crossed that technology keeps working for us this evening. Just a couple of other points before I hand over to Vicky to introduce our guests this evening. The webinar will run for about 45 minutes and we are recording it this evening. So you will be able to view a copy of that video up on our website later this week. And just one final note is that you will be able to ask questions during the webinar. We ask that you use the chat function, which is the little speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. And Vicky will let you know when's a good time to start writing in questions, and she will feed them into the discussion this evening. So it's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Vicky Hargraves, who heads up all our early childhood work at the Education Hub. Vicky.
Thank you, Nina. Welcome everyone to our webinar tonight, exploring relationships in diverse teaching teams. And we've developed this session because I've been aware that recently on the Education Hub we've been talking a lot about ways in which we can collaborate and get involved in more collegial work, and we haven't really unpacked sometimes how tricky that can be given the cultural differences between us. So I asked these fantastic people here to join us tonight. Let me introduce them. First of all, Shahla Damoory is the centre leader and an ECE teacher working at AUT, Auckland University of Technology, and she's been working there since 2007. She migrated originally from Iran in 1993, and she's bilingual, speaking Persian as well as English. And she's passionate about learning from the diverse community in her centre at AUT. Kerry Petera is of Ngāti Kuri descent, and after spending many years working and training at AUT with Shahla, she is now currently working as a provisionally registered and beginning teacher at Ngātaki Primary School in Kaitaia. And finally, Dr Sonja Arndt lectures in early childhood education. She's recently moved from the University of Waikato to the University of Melbourne. Her interest in diversity amongst early childhood teaching teams grew from her experiences of making sense of her German background whilst at primary school in Australia amongst predominantly British peers, and also from teaching in a culturally diverse centre in Orewa. She's also done a PhD focused on the topic of teacher otherness in ECE. So I hope we've got a wealth of perspectives to offer you tonight on this issue of teacher diversity.
Right. It seems like we may have lost Vicky just temporarily. Hopefully she's going to come back. I will launch in with what I really hope is going to be the first question tonight, and nothing's changed since I last got the set of questions through. But I believe the first question for this evening is, what do we mean by the term teacher diversity? And I don't know who wanted to start us off in that discussion.
Because we can't always know what's happening in a big team when we work in an early childhood center. It's always good to have everybody's voice, but it's always not possible to have that. So we know from research that when we have diverse opinions and ideas, then we have a lot of creative ideas. We have a lot of resilience. We have a lot of good things that can happen, but we want to value diversity, but how do we do that? So that's something that we can reflect on as a team. So that could be always a beginning point for us to reflect as practitioners and educators, to get what is the first starting point to gain that trust, to invite everybody to reflect with us.
And Sonja, I know as an academic, you've done a lot of work, often utilising philosophy around the question of otherness and diversity. Can you talk a little bit about how you conceptualise the notion of diversity within a teaching team?
Yeah, so it's in my research, it was a lot of focus on cultural diversity and cultural otherness. But when we think about diversity that Shahla's just been talking about, and we've had a lot of these conversations amongst ourselves as well, it's not only cultural diversity that we see amongst teaching teams. So it can have to do with culture, of course, and with race or with skin color and things that are visible, but it's also got to do with the ways that we live our lives. It's got to do with our backgrounds, where we originate from, that may or may not have to do with cultural ideas, but also with language, with the kind of practices that we're used to in our lives, even just our personalities, our orientations towards particular things within the early childhood team and within the early childhood practices that we have in our settings. So we're thinking across, for example, gender. And when we talk about gender, what does gender mean in many, many different ways of what's come up in various research, but also how do we see gender playing out and being performed within our teaching teams, and what are we doing about how we're working with gender? So there are many different diversities. It's not a singular topic. Kerry, did you have something?
Yeah, I think you've both covered everything as well that I would have mentioned in that, what the diversity we're looking at this evening.
So within that understanding of quite a broad conceptualization of diversity and how it can manifest, what can be some of the barriers to effectively working well together as part of a teacher team that relate to this notion of diversity?
So
I can give an example. Okay, I'll go first again. I can give an example of the diverse teams that especially relates to the multicultural nature of Auckland. You have a lot of migrants and refugees and people from different cultural backgrounds. And we want to have this bicultural curriculum and that honors multiculturalism within itself. And at the same time, we have people who are coming with all these different worldviews. And they've got different languages, different expectations of life sometimes, and different values that sometimes conflict. So how can we put our differences, look at them in a positive way and come up together to have that unity, that kind of reflection as a team. The barrier could be languages, different values that we might bring to the center, to the early childhood center or the environment, and different expectations. So finding ways to resolve differences of opinion in a positive way, I would say, would be the very important factor to remove these hurdles.
I agree, Shahla. I think one of the things that really came across in my research was the barrier of people not thinking that there's a problem. The barrier that people make an assumption that everybody around us thinks the same as we do. That there isn't a diversity, that if, for example, in a team meeting or when we're sitting together and make some kind of a suggestion, if there's silence, that's assumed to be in agreement. But possibly it's hiding a whole host of other barriers for that person, perhaps, who isn't feeling able to speak up, can't speak the language, or has a host of other reasons not to speak up. The barriers also are often, as Shahla indicated, a philosophical kind of a barrier, that people don't necessarily believe in the same aims and intentions for children, in the same interpretations of curriculum documents, for example, or have the same understandings of any other policy or regulatory, or even just the ideas of the kinds of food that we feed to children. So it goes the whole range.
Just listening to you, when I think of, and I'm going back to my ECE experiences and teaching, and just in terms of attending the RI course on the infant toddler team. So, we've all attended the same course with all the same information, but we don't necessarily all draw the same understanding from that. And that's in anything with our values.
Yeah.
For me, I'm coming from a cultural background where, it's common sense. Well, it can be common sense or just basic hygiene that you don't sit on a table, but these things still happen. So they have to be, shared and told, amongst, the team or within the whānau that attend.
Yeah. And sometimes that the saying that common sense isn't always as common as you think. That what is common sense within one group of people isn't necessarily common sense to other people.
I agree.
So Shahla mentioned that idea of talking about the ideas that we hold, and that's a real, a stepping stone, isn't it?
Yeah. And sometimes we don't really know what other people's ideas are. We need to give them the time and to gain that trust to actually communicate openly, and that takes time and effort. Like any other relationship, we need to nurture that connection between us so we can openly communicate. And so long as it's not happening, it's not collaborative. It might be one way, it's not mutual. And what we want is an open kind of mutual relationship with parents and whānau and colleagues. So we get to build the culture of the place together and relate with each other. Yeah.
And just sorry to interrupt the flow. I just noticed that we may have Vicky back again. Vicky.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here by, well, hopefully this works a little bit better. My apologies.
That's right. You will be a much better person to ask the questions than I am. I'm absolutely certain. We've just been discussing some of the barriers that can be put in place around diversity. And I think Shahla was just starting to talk about some of the ways that we can try to put different strategies in place and practices in place to support diverse groups of teachers to work effectively together.
In terms of strategies and practices, I just think back to that idea that often it's promoted to celebrate culture. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, because it's to the intention when curriculum documents or when research or other policies talk about celebrating culture, I think the intention is to recognise and to support the people from diverse cultural backgrounds. But also another point, when we go back to some of the comments that we've already made, perhaps the people whom we're celebrating aren't ready to be celebrated. Maybe they're just new in a new place and they really just want to hide out in the corner and not be pushed forward. So I think that one of the strategies, again, going back to talking to people and giving people time to have their voices heard in their way, in the way that they want to articulate themselves, is that we ask, how can we celebrate? That we give we've been talking about this notion with Kerry about the idea of throwing the rako. So giving them the opportunity, giving people opportunities to articulate themselves, how it would work best for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonja.
Throwing the rako.
And that's a really interesting point, I think, because it's not that easy to communicate our own beliefs and ideas, particularly if we feel that there is maybe some tension or some difference between us and the other members of the teams. Do you have any ideas of how people can communicate ideas and beliefs when they are different to their teams, and how do they manage to find their voice, to hold the rako?
Mm.
I think some of the comments in the chat that are coming through are really fantastic, because they're kind of affirming that idea that it's it takes time. And sometimes when we're in the rushed environment of an early childhood centre, and I did spend a lot of time in an early childhood centre as well, and remember it very dearly, that we know we need to do so many things, and we know we need to get through a set amount of requirements in any particular day. And we might be aware of the fact that we need to make time for each other, but how do we actually do that?
Mm.
We actually build in the time that we have that space to give time, to listen, to create the spaces in different ways from our own, to allow each other to come forward.
Mm. Presumably, you know, it's building those really strong relationships too, and as you say, Sonja, that's going to take lots of time. Anything that you found particularly useful, Shahla or Kerry, working in diverse teams? Anything that you found particularly useful in enabling people to come forward and share a bit more of themselves?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of when you're having just in your staff meetings, it's, you know, brainstorming, and you know, you want everyone to participate, and, you know, writing them down, and where are we thinking the same? You know, what ideas are coming through those team members that are the same, and what's different about the ones that aren't, you know, and how do we bring that difference of opinion into the majority.
I'd like to add to what just Kerry said, you know, also seeing the positive and the possibilities that each one of the staff members can offer. Someone's positive area could be the cooking, and that person could be offering her skills in a family night or family evening in a very beautiful way and multicultural, or, you know, doesn't have to be always a certain set of skills that can be copied from one person to the other. Just finding the positive in each person, because everyone is unique in their own way, and they bring something to this world. And, you know, there are so many different people writing about, you know, our uniqueness, people's human nature, you know, just to recognize that and appreciate that. And that naturally can lead to building that trust that we want to have, to have that collaboration happening, hopefully.
Is there a certain attitude that we need to hold when there is difference? I mean, are we all trying to, obviously we are in some ways all trying to get on the same page, but, you know, is there a way that we can value that there is a bit of difference coming through as well? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea, Vicky, and it brings up that idea that maybe there aren't any answers or certainly not a singular answer, just as there isn't a singular diversity. There are multiple diversities and therefore multiple ways of working with it. But the way maybe is to let go of the idea, and that certainly for many of us, I think, is a big shift in attitude, that we let go of the belief or the desire that we have to achieve a certainty or a definite way of being able to plan, that we can't necessarily go in and intend that this is how it's going to go, because we can't necessarily know that.
Well, coming through in the comments tonight, a lot of people are agreeing that it can be really difficult, especially if they are not from the dominant culture of New Zealand, very difficult to be heard and understood, and wanting to convince people that their culture should also be valued. You know, how can we be assertive and stand up for our cultural views?
That's a tricky comment.
One thing I appreciated at AUT, Early Childhood Centre, was that we celebrated each culture's diversity, and it was something that was really, I was really privileged to be a part of, to learn about all the different cultures that I had never been so close to in a workplace before over such a long period of time.
And there's a nice saying, I'm not sure who said that, but it says that be yourself, everyone else is already taken. So if you just believe in yourself, and share those values and reconstruct, the culture together, because it's about togetherness, it's about having that dialogue, it's about sharing with each other and relating as human beings with each other, because it's relationships at the end of the day speak everything. So no matter how many functions we do, or whatever, how many learning outcomes we take, if there's not genuine relationships, and not much has been achieved, and we all know that. So focus on who you are and be proud of who you are, I suppose. It's hard at times, but it's worth it, I suppose.
I think we found a common theme amongst us was always with food.
Yes. We're all food lovers and appreciating life and having a good laugh and a good conversation. And we learned a lot from you, Kerry, too, while you were with us.
I think a lot of it, from what I'm hearing, it comes down to also sort of the leadership and the culture of the centre. And I'm thinking perhaps if you're in a centre where those things aren't so prominent, maybe the only thing you can really do is model that approach for yourself. So take an interest in your colleagues' cultures and hope that maybe they reciprocate and take an interest in your own culture. Would that be something that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think that it sounds really, really lovely in the centre that you were describing, Kerry, and Kerry and Shahla, when you were together in the centre and had the common interests. And so that's a really fundamental aspect, isn't it, to when we're building relationships, that we find something that can connect us, that we can hang on to together. And for that communication or the dialogue needs to happen, which also is something that we need to find out, how do different people do dialogue? How do we have conversations, and what are the things that are appropriate to say or not appropriate to say, and how do we initiate that? But I just wanted to comment on Vicky's point that you just made, Vicky. The philosopher, as you know, that I used in my research, promotes the idea that she called mini revolts. And for me, I've used this as a term that helps me to think and helps me to talk with my students about the idea that we can create a space around ourselves that disrupts what we've been doing, what we've been believing, how we move forward with ourselves and with our own practice, and then that can engage other people around us. We do it with the idea that we want to engage the people around us, and then it grows from there. And when we're working with children, it grows anyway. But that notion of when one person's on fire, then other people catch on fire around them. So when we're enthusiastic and passionate about what we're doing in our little space, and we create that in the way that we want to create and work on our own attitudes and our own beliefs and engagements, then that might be a way forward.
Thank you, Sonja. I'm wondering if what you've just been talking about with mini revolts and looking at your own attitude could help with this question that we had that came in just before the webinar, about whether a teacher's sort of difficult or discordant behaviour could be a result of culture, and if so, how could you relate those ideas to that particular situation?
Tricky to make that kind of assumption, because we often don't know enough to say with certainty what's happening and why this behavior is interpreted the way we interpret it, or the story that we tell ourselves and the judgments that we make. You know, sometimes we don't know everything that's around that issue, or contributed to a certain upset person in the team, and something that's observed. So again, back to the uncertainty, keep that open, keep yourself open, keeping ourselves open to that we can, you know, leave room for it, and try not to make that assumptions, because it's easy to make those assumptions, and but the effect that we get from it is not very pleasant. It's not gonna help to solve any solution, find any solution. It's often makes things more complicated. So maybe questioning would be helpful, you know, finding the right questions to ask. Thinking of what is the right question that I can ask at this moment that I'm feeling stuck. And yeah, that's sometimes really hard to find, finding the right question, because it could be judgmental. You can ask a question and make the other person feel hurt just by asking a question, or so you got to be very careful and think about it, how to ask about our uncertainties, because yeah, we need to have that dialogue somehow.
At the same time,
Absolutely.
it can be confronting to ask that question too. So it's the, I think you've hit on the topic of assumptions again, Shahla.
Yeah.
We can't assume.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the time, you know, just waiting, giving the time, and sometimes, you know, you just find more facts as you wait before you kind of jumping to a conclusion that's not correct. And yeah, and it's all coming back for me. I've learned a lot through reading about positive inquiry, you know, the recognizing the positive in the people, in the diverse team. It takes us back to look at ourselves, and also, you know, nobody's perfect, nobody's always doing everything right, you know, just looking at it as something we are learning together and growing up together and creating that culture, which starts with making our vision, I suppose, which, you know, we need to have a dream together.
Some interesting comments coming through in relation to what you're saying about waiting, about being courageous, as you've mentioned, Shahla, about you know, being courageous to inquire, but also just sitting with the uncomfort, not trying to jump in and find out what's going on, but just sitting with that uncomfort. What are your thoughts on that?
It's not easy. The easiest reaction is to react, but there's a difference between responding in a responsible way and reacting. And
absolutely,
yeah, so it's not easy to be non-judgmental because as human beings that's very tempting at times, but again it takes us back to everybody deserving to be given that opportunity to be respected and to try again. If they're making a mistake, to be respectfully engaged with each other to find a way forward. And that's what, again, more important, and that's what's building the trust, because you can have a great relationship and all that trust could be lost over you know, a confrontational approach or something that's not fair or, you know, to be said. So got to be very careful and thoughtful or reflective about our role as teachers and as colleagues, I suppose.
I think there's a lot written about, I mean, I know there's a lot written because I've read a lot that's been written about knowing people. So it seems to sometimes give us the idea that if we just make enough effort, we'll know other people well, or we'll know how to work with other people, or we'll have the solutions. But then there are other people also who write about the idea that we may never know everything, even about ourselves. And so how can it kind of puts us, for my way of thinking, it's a bit of a relief to think, if I can't even know myself completely, because I still do things that I think, well, where did that come from? I didn't expect to react like that. I didn't expect to feel like that in this situation. Then how on earth can I expect to fully know that I'm working with in my teaching team? And even that orientation seems to put me in a position where I have to ask more questions, or I'm a little bit more tentative, or I'm a little bit more, it's a bit humbling, because it makes me question myself more before I can move out to talk to other people in particular ways, because I can't assume to know them.
Can I say, I'm just listening to you and Shahla, it's, you know, when you get to work in a team over a long period of time, and it is that knowing, and so you and understanding, and it's about knowing that you're going to have to agree to disagree on some things. And it also brings to mind that whakatauki, no te raudo, nāku te raudo, ka ora ai te iwi. So it's all these communities that come together that enable us to be the teachers that we are to our learners.
And comments on the chat tonight are saying how valuable that is, and how you know, without that diversity that we can all bring, we'll bring a little bit of knowledge from our baskets. You know, otherwise it's just an uninspiring curriculum. So a lot about how we shouldn't be blaming each other. We should be trying to be reflective and learning about ourselves through our interactions with each other. And I'm just wondering whether you could comment a little bit about the sort of qualities or attitudes you think are really important to these encounters with our diverse teaching team.
Just going back to positive, looking at positives, the appreciative inquiry approach, you know, just allowing everyone to be themselves and focus on the positives that could bring us forward together. And that at the end of the day, it's the mahitahi, the shared teamwork. It's everybody's success. It's everybody can celebrate that. It's nothing, you know, it's not, it's also individual achievement when you celebrate differences and acknowledge different values. But when you can come together and grow together as a team, that's even bigger.
Anything you'd like to add, Kerry, on this, in terms of the attitudes that you need to bring to work each day?
You have to be open to receive, because every day is different, you know, and when, you know, whatever we bring into the centre, you know, if we haven't had a good, I don't know, good evening or something, we have to brush that all aside and, you know, you be in this space and be aware that it's the children we're there for. So that openness is, I think, would be the main one for me, to receive what's happening around us with our teachers.
And remembering that children looking at us, they feel our energy, they sense everything that's happening, the way we relate with each other, our laughter or our upset look at each other, they feel it. They're very bright. So
yeah, totally. I think that brings you also to that greater environment, relational environment that we create just by the energies that are between us. That might just be the facial expressions, you know, when we're looking across the room and we make eye contact, we smile, we interact in various ways. It doesn't have to be a big dialogic way. And it shows the trust that so one of those big things is the trust that, Kerry, like you say, we have good days, we have bad days. It's Katie Pai,
Yeah.
it's going to be okay. We can still do
And we are entitled to our own emotions too, you know, and that's when mindfulness comes to our help, you know. I know that there's a huge difference on the days that I do 10 minutes mindfulness practice in the morning and the days that I don't. So it's like a gift, as they say in the practice, they say it's a gift to yourself. So looking after ourselves, valuing ourselves, getting to know our own culture and being proud of it. I mean, that's going to happen over time, but also learning from other people, reaching out to them, that's going to, yeah, hopefully help make that culture that we want to have. And it's not easy.
Can I follow up?
Easy to talk,
No.
but.
Can I follow up with just sharing a comment again on the chat? Someone saying that the subtle comments and the innuendo, those kind of things that really create the tension, like you say, probably children pick up on, Shahla, and that creates the lack of trust in the team. And then can I just ask you one last question before we conclude for the night, and that's about, as you've mentioned, about being open and having an open mind towards other people's situations and their beliefs. And so one of the questions coming through on the chat is, how can teaching teams sort of create really open-minded discussions, discussing things like the shared values and aspects of, you know, really key aspects of practice in a teaching and learning setting? How do you start those conversations? Did you do that through a staff meeting?
Sorry, what was the question? The last.
Really wanting to generate some really open-minded discussion where people, you know, can really put their thoughts on the table in regard to particular teaching practices or particular values. Would you do that in a staff meeting, and how would you really trigger an open-minded discussion? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah. So can I just briefly say it's gonna take time. It's gonna take a lot of effort to build that trust, and you can use all different ways of team building exercises or values cards or, you know, different approaches. But again, back to the trust. If there's trust, it's gonna happen naturally, and focus on that.
So taking a step back, looking at yourself, looking at how you interact, what you make people feel safe in your presence, those kinds of, taking a step back to those kinds of things first, you would say, Shahla?
I would say that looking back at my own situation, starting from a teaching background and then to a management situation, I had to learn a lot, and I had to make a lot of mistakes, and but also I had to learn from the learning opportunities that came up on me. And I was lucky enough to be in a team that was full of potential. Like Kerry, you offered so much during the years that you worked with us. And there's a lot of growth happening when you open yourself to that. So I still think that, you know, it's an ongoing journey as with everyone. So it's just keeping that, as you said, the mini reward, the tiny step ahead of you, you know, just think about our next obstacle and next solution. Just don't think too big, otherwise it's going to be too scary. Just focus on some good.
I think that's really good advice.
Step. Yeah, and being that mindfulness definitely is needed, because our lives are so busy and so complicated, and so much is happening that by the end of each day we're so overloaded. So we need to unload. We need to relate and connect back. So for me, it's not been easy, but it's definitely been a lot of growth. I've learned. I'm still learning, and everyone brings something positive that I'm feeling blessed to be working with the team that I've been working with.
Shahla, do you think?
Thank you, Shahla.
That's all right.
Do you think that part of the trust and the relationship building comes from opening ourselves to other people's views? So instead of dating opinions, seeking opinions, you know, if we twist around which is a difficult thing, you know, if there is a dominant view in it, and there are a few people who come from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Then
definitely, yeah.
Something
so you can't, at the end of the day, you can't be policing people, and you have to actually come up with a culture in the place that works, when people can relate to it with their heart. And if those values are not respected deep down, it's going to show. It's going to show very clearly. It's not going to go much far, you know. So keep working at creating that shared understanding or questioning, because we could, like, either person who's having this conversation or courageous conversation, you know, when disagreements come up, we could be wrong. We could be totally wrong, and keep asking questions from each other and finding out better ways of doing or thinking can be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. Should we just take a minute now to sort of summarise your kind of key take-home messages from the webinar tonight? What would be the kind of key message you'd like to finish with tonight? Kerry, could I ask you to start?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just go back a bit to where Shahla spoke. So it's, I'll just share that someone saw what I was capable of, and that was Shahla, and to begin with, when I started my journey at AUT. So it's someone seeing that value in you, and that can be a point of building a trusting relationship. You know, how else? Yeah, it's valuing what each other brings, and then having that trusting relationship, which has been the common theme throughout the evening conversation.
Thank you, Kerry. That's lovely to hear a real concrete example of that. We all want to be valued, don't we? Yeah. Sonja, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would probably add to that, and love to hear this story in more depth from you, Kerry, because I think that it's how we're valued. It's the way that the people do that it was meaningful to you. That we feel it as valuing, and not in other ways othering, further othering us. So it somehow touches a chord with us. It's meaningful and relevant to us, just like our practices need to be meaningful and relevant to the children. That sense of belonging comes for us when the teachers around us value us. So for me, I suppose my takeaway would be twofold. So one is to not get too upset about sitting with the uncertainty, to become a little bit more comfortable with the discomfort of that. And the other one is to think about diverse ways of the inquiry, of the engagement with people from different backgrounds to our own. So making the space for it and taking baby steps.
Shahla, is there anything you'd like to conclude with tonight?
The only thing I would like to add is that when ideas come up and we might disagree, doesn't mean that we don't trust each other. Disagreement can be very good, healthy foundation for finding better ideas and more profound ways of teaching. And so again, back to the uncertainties and feeling of discomfort, it's not a bad thing. It's an opportunity for growth, and going to help us to grow as a better teacher, as a better person, hopefully, when we respond to each other well, not react.
Such a good point.
Thank you. Thank you so much, the three of you, for joining us tonight and sharing these ideas. I'm apologies for missing some of the conversation, but I think that, again, it's just another diverse situation that you needed to be kind and I've learned heaps from listening to you tonight. Thank you for sharing this conversation with us. Yes, and I'd just say good evening to everybody tonight. Thank you for joining us for this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora.